Hey, horror fans, welcome back to Real Talk Horror Edition. This is the podcast and video series where I try to uncover the blood soaked backstories of horror's most infamous films. I'm your host, Josh, film critic, VHS survivor, and part time undertaker in the town of Potter's Bluff. Today, we're heading into one of the most atmospheric, eerie entries on the Video Nasties list. This is a film that snuck in under the radar, looking like a ghost story, but it left behind a body count worthy of a slasher. That's right, we're talking about Dead and Buried. Now, this one's got all the small town creep factor, undead weirdness, and a script penned by the guy that helped write Alien. That's right, The Alien, Ridley Scott's classic horror film. But it still somehow ended up on the UK's naughty list. So why was it banned? Does it hold up? And should you track it down? Well, let's take some time and dig up some of the facts. So let me set the stage. It's 1981. Horror is in a transformative place. The slasher wave is in full motion, with Friday the 13th and Halloween shaping what's popular. But there, tucked between these mainstream scream machines, was this deeply strange, evocative film that didn't exactly play by the same rules. Dead and Buried, directed by Gary Sherman, whose name is not as immediately recognizable as John Carpenter or Romero, but he absolutely earned his genre stripes with earlier work like Deathline. It was also known as Raw Meat, where distributors thought the word line and Deathline just wasn't cutting it. Deathline is a grim little underground horror flick about cannibalism in the London Underground, and it showed that Sherman had a taste for the macabre and this knack for weaving horror into the fabric of everyday life. With Dead and Buried, Sherman delivers something uniquely unsettling. It was technically an American production with a US cast and funding, but the feel of the film, well, that's where things get a little interesting here, because this movie has a lot more in common with European horror, like Lucio Fulci's fog-drenched Dread or the surreal pacing of Gene Roland than it does with its American peers. The film really exudes atmosphere. There's a constant coastal haze that's both literal and metaphorical. It's slow, methodical, and it never quite lets us settle in. Visually, the film looks like someone took like an EC comic and stripped away the punchlines and steeped it in decay. There's a persistent sense of rot, not just physical, though there's plenty of that, but spiritual and social. The town of Potter's Bluff, where the story takes place, feels like it's just sitting on the edge of the world and maybe the edge of sanity as well. The fog never truly lifts. The locals are friendly in that suspicious way, like they're performing small town charm as a ritual rather than something that they genuinely feel. Now, the screenplay is where the horror pedigree really kicks in. It was co-written by Ronald Shusett and Dan O'Bannon. You might not recognize Shusett's name right away, but I think you'll know his work. He co-created the story with Dan O'Bannon for Alien, and like he's a royalty in the horror area. Dan O'Bannon wrote Alien. He directed Return of the Living Dead. He had a hand in Total Recall and Life Force. So these guys who knew how to mess with the human body and the human mind often simultaneously. And here in Dead and Buried, they really got to do both. Now, the plot, without giving away any of the twist things here, centers on a series of truly bizarre murders happening in Potter's Bluff. Tourists arrive seemingly at random, and they're then violently killed, often with a group of locals standing around, silently watching, even photographing the whole thing like it's a piece of performance art. And then when you just start to think it's a simple murder mysteries, the bodies start showing up again, not in the morgue, not buried, but alive, kind of. And that's where things really start spiraling into this kind of coastal Lovecraftian nightmare. The sheriff, played by James Ferrantino, is kind of the anchor for us in the audience. He's the guy trying to make sense of this totally senseless world. Ferrantino plays him as weary but determined, like he's two steps away from giving up, but knows that he can't. He's sort of this perfect everyman who guides us through this strange little town. And then the real scene stealer shows up. Jack Albertson, Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka, the man from Chico and the Man. But before the sweet old man in pajamas, that's not him here. Here he's the town coroner and mortician, and he's really magnetic. His performance is cold, methodical, and subtly menacing. There's a real theatrical quality to how he delivers even his most mundane lines. And it really works beautifully in this film that's constantly walking the fine line between surrealism and horror. And this role was his last. He passed away not long after filming. And honestly, this is one hell of a send off. He brings a kind of gravitas and an eerie warmth to his character that make his scenes deeply unsettling. You never know if he's being helpful or hiding something horrible. Spoiler, it's usually the latter. But I want to place this list on the timeline of Video Nasties. If you're not familiar, the Video Nasties were the group of films targeted by the UK government during a moral panic in the early 80s. The idea was that home video, then a new and booming market, was bringing extreme horror into people's living rooms unchecked. No rating system, no censorship, just this pure unfiltered terror. Dead and Buried was kind of a surprise entry on this list. This wasn't some grainy backyard slasher shot for $5 and a cheeseburger. It had a real budget, real actors, and a theatrical release, but that didn't save it from the censors. Because while the violence in Dead and Buried isn't constant, when it comes hard. And it does so in a way that's deeply uncomfortable. It doesn't have that wink to the audience. There's no final girl, no ironic distance, just dread. So, why was it banned, though? Now, I think the reason that this movie landed in hot water was not because it doesn't drip with gore from start to finish, and not because it's cannibal, holocaust, or drill or killer, but when this film does choose violence, it does it with a kind of precision. It makes you in the audience feel it. The scene most often cited is this infamous hypodermic needle attack, and it's genuinely kind of hard to watch. A man is strapped down, he's immobilized. There's a sense of helplessness that sets in before even a drop of blood is spilled. Then, in this clinical slow motion nightmare, this long, glinting hypodermic needle is jabbed directly into his eye. And it's not done for shock value, it's done to disturb you. The camera doesn't cut away, it actually forces us to stay right there in the room to witness the act. And I think that's just part one. Immediately after, the man's face is splashed with acid, and the effect works brutally convincing. It's wet, it's messy, it sticks with you. I mean, the man screams, but it's not the operatic wailing like you get in something like a Friday the 13th. This is a more raw, guttural, desperate kind of thing. The whole scene is really intimate, which makes it even more unbearable. There is no joy in it, there is only horror. And the tone, the seriousness, the intimacy of the violence, that is part of what got this film flagged. The UK's Director of Public Prosecutions put it on their list in 1983 as part of their crackdown. And while many video nasties were condemned for being explicit, exploitative, or morally bankrupt, well, Dead and Buried didn't really fit that mold. Instead, this one had something subtler, something harder to categorize. And I think to the censors, that's what made this feel more dangerous. The violence in the film is orchestrated like a ritual. The group killings have a ceremonial feel. There's eerie repetition to how the townspeople participate, like they're following these ancient instructions. This wasn't just murder, it was performance. And I think that theatricality gives the violence a layer of meaning, even if that meaning was grotesque. Now, British authorities, I don't think they like that. The British Board of Film Classification and the DPP, they were already under immense pressure from conservative groups and the tabloid newspapers who really wanted to draw a line in the sand. The infamous headline from the Daily Mail, "Ban these evil videos," well, that led to this political firestorm. And even though I've said it before, Dead and Buried was not the most obscene film on the list, it is one of the most effective. And in some ways, I think that really makes it worse. You couldn't just laugh it off as grindhouse trash. It had real craftsmanship, real atmosphere, and perhaps worst of all, it had a way of staying with you. And that's what the censors were afraid of. Not just people seeing violent imagery, but people remembering it. Efforts were made to tone it down. Some home video versions cut out portions of the eye and acid sequences. Other scenes were trimmed to remove lingering gore or implied necrophilia. But even in these neutered forms, the film still caught a lot of flack. Its vibe was simply too strange, too morbid, too undead. And for years, Dead and Buried remained a black sheep among horror fans in the UK, talked about in hushed tones, passed around on bootleg tapes. It wasn't until 2005 that the film was finally cleared and released uncut in the UK. After decades of advocacy and reevaluation of the Video Nasties list. And then when it came back, it started to earn a new appreciation. Modern critics and fans alike now point to Dead and Buried as an overlooked gem, a slow burn gothic tale with really incredible practical effects, a very haunting score, and a mystery that plays more like a Twilight Zone episode that was penned by Clive Barker. I mean, it's really become a true cult classic, but not just for its content, but for that atmosphere and its willingness to sort of push horror into a different direction. Because ultimately, that's what makes Dead and Buried special. It's not just what it shows you, it's how it shows you. The pacing, the performances, and that foggy cinematography. The idea that death isn't the end, but the beginning of something much worse. That your neighbors might be smiling for reasons you can't understand. That beneath every friendly wave is a secret waiting to be unearthed. So the next time someone brings up the Video Nasties and rattles off the usual suspects, I Spit on Your Grave, Cannibal Ferox, and unfortunately the Evil Dead, throw in Dead and Buried. Remind them, like Evil Dead, that sometimes the scariest things are the quiet ones or the ones that we are the harshest to. But especially those that whisper instead of scream. And that's what this movie does. So let me talk about the film itself, how I felt. Does it hold up? Short answer, absolutely. Long answer, it is probably one of the most underrated horror gems of the early 80s. Dead and Buried isn't just good for what it is weirdly, wonderfully, uncomfortably great. It's up there with Tenebrae and The Beyond and The Evil Dead. This is one of those movies that feels like a dream that you only half remember. It's disjointed in all the right ways, creeping into your brain with its slow, almost hypnotic pace. It's eerie, beautiful, deeply unsettling. There are moments when it almost feels like you're watching a ghost story being told from inside the ghost. And then the visuals. This movie looks fantastic. The cinematography by Stephen Poster, who would later shoot Donnie Darko, is moody as hell. The town of Potter's Bluff, with its permanently gray skies, rolling fog, and this time locked kind of architecture, feels like it exists just outside of reality. You can practically feel the damp, salty air coming off the coastline. And Poster's camera moves slowly and deliberately. It lingers on faces, shadows, odd details, things that you maybe don't notice right away, but start to haunt you afterward. This is a film that knows when not to move the camera, and that kind of restraint only amplifies the tension. The score by Joe Renzetti is another key element that really elevates this film. It's haunting, almost lullaby like at times, with these soft piano cues that really lull you into a false sense of comfort, only to then be disrupted by something brutal or deeply off kilter. The music really becomes part of the atmosphere, part of the fog. It doesn't try to overpower the scenes, but underscores them with quiet dread. And that choice really makes all of the difference. And then the pacing. This is a slow burn, and that is a compliment. We live in an era where horror is often cut fast and cut loud, where a scare needs to come every 90 seconds or it's seen as a misfire. But Dead and Buried, well, it doesn't play that game. It's patient. It takes its time to set mood, tone, and character. And as a result, when the horror doesn't arrive, well, that hits just as hard. The violence is sudden, it's shocking, and very realistic in the best way. It doesn't linger on the gore for gore's sake, but when it decides to go there, it really goes there. I mentioned before that needle scene. And those of you that have seen this, you know, when that hypodermic needle eh, filled with acid or embalming fluid or whatever, it's just graphic, it's personal, and it's still incredibly tough to watch, even by today's standards. Not because it's garish, over the top, cartoonish, but because it actually feels too real. That scene alone, I really believe, is probably what got this movie added to the Video Nasties list. But what makes it worse or better from the horror fan's perspective is that it sticks with you. It's not the kind of horror that makes you jump. This is the kind of horror that makes you flinch and then think about it 3 days later while you're brushing your teeth. It really just sticks in the back of your mind. Another standout moment, the photography murder that opens the film. It is deceptively simple. A couple on the beach snapping some flirty Polaroids, unaware that they're being watched. It's sunny, romantic, and then bam, things spiral into madness. That opening sequence is a real masterclass in tonal whiplash. It immediately establishes that no one is safe and that things are going to get strange. It's one of the most effective cold opens in horror, especially from the ones that I've seen in that era. And it really sets the tone for everything in this story that follows. And I can't forget those performances. Really, James Ferrantino as Sheriff Dan Gillis, our anchor in the storm of strangeness, he brings this grounded, everyman presence to the film. You believe his confusion, his descent into paranoia. He's not a superhero. He's not a genius. He's just a guy trying to make sense of something that absolutely refuses to be made sense of. But for me, the real MVP here is Jack Albertson. In this movie, he is just so subtle. He drives this fine edge that plays as absolutely terrifying. As the town coroner, he's a guy who seems to know way more than he ever lets on. And Albertson's performance is this slow reveal because he's calm and measured and even pleasant on the surface. But there's always something there, something rotten just under his skin. He delivers every line with a little twinkle in his eye that somehow makes everything worse. As I said before, this was his final film role, and he went out with a bang. And as far as a review, I have to talk about the makeup and effects. These were done by none other than Stan Winston, the same Stan Winston that did Aliens, Terminator, Jurassic Park, and Predator. You get the picture. But before all of that, he was cutting his teeth on films like this. And the work here is already next level. The corpse effects, they're disturbingly realistic. The reanimations, which I won't say too much about if you haven't seen it, but they're subtle and freaky. There's great use of stitches, discoloration, minor deformities that never get explained, and they all add to the film's kind of uncanny valley vibe. It's all practical, it's all textured, and it's all the more unnerving because of it. Comparing it to other films that ended up on the Video Nasties list, well, this one feels kind of like an odd one out. Others were blood-soaked exploitation flicks that aimed to offend and shock. This one was clearly trying to say something. It's not mindless gore, it's atmospheric horror with a purpose. It's telling a story. It's strange, dark, and unsettling story, but it is one that builds and unfolds in very smart, calculated ways. And thematically, there's a lot going on here. Beneath the surface level of all that horror is a whole exploration of identity, control, and what it means to be alive. It's a film about the facade of normalcy, about a seemingly quiet, idyllic town hiding something monstrous just under the surface. That's a theme that's used a lot in horror, but I think Dead and Buried pulls it off in this uniquely bleak way. The more you find out, the more you realize that everything is a lie. And by the end, you're not even sure who or what the protagonist really is. It also has something to say about the role of authority. Our sheriff, who's supposed to be the protector and the one who understands what's going on, is just as lost as we are, maybe even more so. The town is already too far gone. The rules have changed, and he's still playing by the old ones. And that's a bleak but very relevant idea, especially in today's world. So, bottom line, Dead and Buried gets a 4 out of 5 reels from me. It's not exactly a perfect film. There are some moments where the plot gets a little murky and a few scenes that kind of slow down the momentum of the film, but it is absolutely essential horror viewing. It's a masterclass of atmosphere and has great performance, some really gorgeous visuals, and truly unsettling horror set pieces. This is kind of a movie that dares to be weird, and I think that's what makes this one really special. It's a horror that sticks to your bones, and it definitely is one of the best films to come out of the whole Video Nasties era. Totally undeserving of the censorship it endured, and honestly, it probably benefited long term from the controversy because now it is a cult classic. And if you haven't seen it, I think you need to fix that immediately. But that's going to do it for today's episode of the horror edition here at Real Talk. Dead and Buried, not the flashiest nasty on the list, but it is one of the most well crafted and one that truly deserved a second life after censorship. And it was buried the first time around, but it's out and proud now. So let me know in the comments, have you seen Dead and Buried? Did it haunt you like it haunted me? And what's your take? Worthy of the nasty list, or was it just misunderstood? And if you liked this episode, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, tap the notification bell so you never miss our dives into those darker sides of cinema. And next time on the Video Nasties Files, I want to head into the sands of Egypt for Dawn of the Mummy. This is a film that asks, what if your ancient evil also wanted to rip out your intestines? I don't think you're going to want to miss it. But until then, stay spooky, stay strange, and please remember to rewind those tapes.